My name is Amani Washington, and I am 34 years old. I sit here now, feeling the phantom pain of fractured ribs and a broken heart, knowing the full, hideous truth. I had just inherited $11 million, $11 million, a fortune that was supposed to be the launchpad for a new life, a grand escape from the mediocrity and quiet desperation my marriage had become. Instead, it became the reason for my nearly fatal downfall. I was rushing home to tell my husband, Marcus. I was going to surprise him, tell him we were free, that we could buy the house he always wanted, that we could finally stop pretending we were happy. I was so consumed by the sheer, exhilarating weight of that secret inheritance, the trust fund finalized just hours before that. I wasn't watching the road, and then the truck slammed into me. I survived a crash. A collision so violent it twisted the frame of my car into unrecognizable wreckage and left me a wreck of broken bones. I woke up in the hospital, alone, completely, terrifyingly alone, realizing that the inheritance had been sealed, but my fate was hanging by a thread. I lay there, physically destroyed, trying to cling to life, but when the real wreckage walked in my husband, that's when the true destruction began. When I finally reached Marcus, he wasn't worried. He wasn't rushing to my side. He was annoyed. Pure, cold annoyance. He told me he was too busy with an urgent case to deal with hospital drama. He told me he had no time or money for a loser who couldn't even manage to drive safely. He called me a financial drain and a failure. And then he hung up. The man I had sworn to cherish, the man who swore to protect me, chose a phone call over my life. I was ready to accept the betrayal, the abandonment. I was already writing him out of the new $11 million script I was creating for myself. But the real horror, the cinematic, soul-crushing moment of absolute betrayal, happened days later. He walked into my sterile, lonely hospital room. And he wasn't alone. He was wearing a brand new, expensive suit, and he was holding hands with a woman whose hand was clasped possessively around his arm. He looked vibrant, successful, completely unburdened by my near-death experience. He strode over to my bedside, threw a thick stack of divorce papers onto the pristine white sheets covering my broken body, and announced, without a flicker of remorse, that he was done. But it was when his new wife, this sleek, high-powered lawyer he was flaunting, finally looked down at my face, lying helpless and broken in the bed, that the world stopped. She saw my name tag. She saw my bandaged head. She saw the truth of my identity. And she screamed, a raw, piercing, gutter screech of pure, unadulterated shock and terror. She dropped her expensive briefcase, the leather hitting the linoleum with a heavy, sickening thud, and stood there, paralyzed, facing the person she never, ever expected to see alive and awake. If you have ever been betrayed by the person who is supposed to love you most, if you have ever found out that the person sleeping next to you was your greatest enemy, then you know the seismic shift of that moment. Please, hit that like button and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. You will not believe what I uncovered about her, about him, and about the $11 million they desperately thought they had already stolen from me. That scream wasn't just fear. It was the sound of a conspiracy unraveling, the sound of a legal professional realizing she had been caught red-handed. The reason she screamed was simple. My husband had no idea. She was my lawyer, the one managing the $11 million trust fund that had just cleared, and she thought I was dead. The beeping sound was the first thing I truly registered, a high-pitched, steady beep, beep, beep that cut through the agonizing fog in my head. I tried to open my eyes. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room felt like knives stabbing into my brain. I was at Mercy General Hospital in Atlanta. The room was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. A sharp, tearing pain shot through my chest as I tried to take a deep breath. It felt like my ribs were grinding together. I was broken. Physically, structurally, undeniably broken. But the physical pain was a dull ache compared to the agonizing clarity that followed. I was alone. No flowers, no concerned relative sitting vigil. Just a heart monitor and a terrified nurse checking my vitals. I had survived a collision that should have killed me. And my husband, Marcus, my supposed partner, my protector, was nowhere to be found. I managed to grab the phone, a monumental effort that sent white-hot agony through my shoulder, and dial his number. My fingers were clumsy, my voice a painful, reedy whisper when he finally picked up. Marcus, it's me. Amani. I was in a terrible crash. I'm at Mercy General. I'm broken, honey. I need you. The silence on the line was longer than the time it took the ambulance to arrive. When he spoke, his voice wasn't laced with fear or relief. It was laced with pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Amani, are you serious right now?" he snapped. His tone was dismissive, like I was interrupting an important football game or a business meeting. "I am in the middle of a massive closing. I can't leave. Why are you calling me with this drama?" Drama. My near-death experience, my agonizing injuries, the immediate threat to my life, was drama. I tried to tell him the details, to convey the sheer terror of the crash, the fact that I was lucky to be alive, but he cut me off with a cold, financial calculation. "Look, I can't afford to take time off right now. You know how much this case means, and honestly, Amani, you need to learn some responsibility. Why are you driving so carelessly? We just paid the insurance deductible last month. Do you realize how much this is going to cost me?" Me. Everything was about him. His career, his money, his inconvenience. He wasn't talking about my recovery. He was talking about his balance sheet. He was talking about how my broken body was going to affect his premium. The man I had been married to for 7 years, the man I was rushing home to make a millionaire, was abandoning me in my moment of greatest need. "Marcus," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I'm in pain. I need you to just come and see me. Just for 10 minutes. Please." His sigh was loud, heavy, and drenched in martyrdom. "I don't have time for this, Amani. Call your mother or something. Stop being such a financial drain and a failure. Handle it." And then the sound that shattered my heart more completely than the crash shattered my ribs, the flat, decisive click of the dial tone. He hung up. He chose his convenience, his case, his perfect, immaculate schedule over the physical and emotional survival of his wife. I lay back on the pillows, the tears scalding paths down my cheeks. The physical pain was nothing. The emotional pain was a gaping wound, hemorrhaging all the love and trust I had ever invested in him. He had exposed himself not just as a poor husband, but as a morally bankrupt monster. The $11 million inheritance was a secret I had guarded for him, for our future. Now, it was a weapon I was going to wield against him. He wanted me to handle it? Fine, I would handle it. Starting with him, the crash had fractured my body, but Marcus's dial tone had fractured my spirit. It left me weak, but also cold and clear-eyed. I knew he was despicable, but even I wasn't prepared for the audacity of his next move. The 3rd day after the crash, he finally showed up. He didn't come alone. He strode into the room, not with flowers, not with apologies, but with a woman clinging to his arm. She was tall, sharp, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. She had the self-satisfied smile of a predator who had just secured her trophy. I lay there, trussed up in bandages, watching them. He looked at me with clinical detachment, as if I were a particularly unpleasant piece of old furniture he was finally discarding. He didn't even ask how I was. He didn't check my bandages. He didn't touch me. He didn't even introduce the woman. Instead, he walked straight to the bedside table and threw down a thick envelope. "Divorce papers. Sign these, Amani," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, like he was ordering takeout. "We're done. I want this clean and quick. My lawyer has prepared a minimal settlement. You'll get to keep your car if it's salvageable and your apartment lease. Now sign them so I can get back to work." Minimal settlement. He was offering me table scraps after 7 years of marriage. 7 years of me sacrificing my career, managing his household, and supporting his ascent up the legal ladder. He was so confident in his control, so convinced of my helplessness, that he thought I would sign my life away while lying broken in a hospital bed. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a white-hot spike of pure defensive rage that momentarily eclipsed the physical pain. I wanted to tell him about the $11 million. I wanted to watch his smug face crumble into desperate begging, but the time wasn't right. I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal first. I focused my eyes on the woman beside him. She was leaning in close, whispering something in his ear, probably congratulating him on his cold efficiency. She had the look of a high-powered attorney, meticulous and predatory. She was Marcus's new life, the clean, unburdened future he was racing toward. "Who is she, Marcus?" I whispered, forcing the question out, my throat tight with suppressed fury. He didn't even look at me. "Doesn't matter. She's my future. Just sign the papers, Amani. Don't make this messy." "It's already messy," I stated, my voice low and shaking. You left your wife broken and bleeding, and you show up with your mistress demanding a divorce. This is not clean, Marcus. This is disgusting. He scoffed, rolling his eyes at his new partner. It was a gesture of shared contempt, a silent pact against me, the wounded animal in the bed. He confirmed, in that instant, that his betrayal was total, his heart utterly corrupted. He wasn't just leaving. He was performing an act of public humiliation, proving that he valued his new conquest and his clear schedule over my very existence. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't cry. I simply took a breath, a shallow, agonizing breath, and filed away the scene. The smug new woman, the minimal settlement offer, the callous dismissal. It was all evidence. Every piece of his heartless performance was a nail I would drive into his coffin later. He wanted a clean divorce. He was going to get a public execution. The execution of his career, his reputation, and his freedom. He just didn't know I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, armed with a secret he had no idea he was sacrificing his entire life to escape. He was still talking about the minimal settlement, about how quickly I needed to sign the papers so he could move on with his perfect, unburdened life. He was completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb sitting next to him, the woman whose hand he was holding. I stared at her. This cold, beautiful, predatory woman. I was forcing myself to remember every detail. The sharp cut of her blonde hair, the ridiculously oversized diamond on her ring finger, the confident, I own the room posture. I realized I knew that face. I had seen that face somewhere before. Maybe at one of Marcus's sterile corporate holiday parties, or perhaps on a billboard for his law firm's most aggressive competitor. The recognition was a dull flicker, overshadowed by the agony of betrayal. She finally turned to me, her face contorted in a mask of superior pity, ready to deliver some condescending parting shot. But then her eyes moved from my bandaged chest, up past the tubes and wires, to my name tag on the collar of my flimsy hospital gown, Amani Washington. And that's when it happened. She saw my name, she saw my face, and the superior pity instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, paralyzing terror. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light, turning into two enormous black holes of shock. Her jaw dropped, forming a silent, horrified "oh." She let out a scream. A terrible, guttural, high-pitched noise that seemed to defy the elegant composure of her power suit. It wasn't the sound of pain. It was the sound of a carefully constructed lie exploding. It was the sound of a criminal being caught in the act. She dropped her briefcase. The leather hit the tiled floor with a sickening thud, and papers, legal documents, spreadsheets, and thick, sealed envelopes scattered everywhere, a blizzard of damning evidence around her expensive heels. She took 3 stumbling steps back, pressing her hand over her mouth, her manicured fingers shaking violently. Marcus, oblivious as ever, turned to her, annoyed. "Tamara, what is wrong with you? Stop being dramatic." Tamara, that was her name. And in that moment, as I stared into her terrified, exposed eyes, the pieces slammed together with brutal force, making the sound of my husband's name meaningless. The lawyer, the one managing the $11 million trust fund that had just cleared, the one who had walked me through all the complex legal steps of securing the inheritance just before the crash. Tamara Hayes, the high-powered attorney I had hired in absolute secrecy to handle the inheritance from my wealthy, estranged uncle. She was the only person in the world who knew about the $11 million trust, the only one. And she was standing here, holding hands with the husband who had just abandoned me, demanding I sign my life away for a pittance. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was a conspiracy. It was a cold, calculated plot. Marcus and Tamara, husband and lawyer, they had paired up, believing I was permanently out of the way, perhaps even knowing I was out of the way. She thought I was dead, or at the very least, so mentally incapacitated from the crash that I couldn't access the money. Her scream was the realization that their entire, monstrous scheme had just walked back from the grave. I wasn't just a wounded wife anymore. I was the secret they thought they had buried. My anger became a sharp, quiet weapon. The pain in my ribs was nothing compared to the cold, focused resolve in my heart. They wanted the $11 million. They wanted a clean divorce. They were going to get a public, career-ending prosecution. And I, the broken woman in the hospital bed, was the star witness. Tamara's scream was the sound of my redemption. It stripped away the last layer of my pity, leaving behind pure, cold, focused rage. The pain in my ribs was a constant reminder, a drumbeat of the injury they had inflicted. but the emotional pain was now channeled into a single, devastating purpose: revenge. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was weak. They thought I was so broken, so incapacitated by the crash and the divorce papers, that they could swoop in, legally dispose of me, and claim the $11 million fortune that was rightfully mine. Tamara, the professional ethicist, the esteemed partner at her law firm, had committed the cardinal sin, a catastrophic conflict of interest. She was my confidential attorney, the only one who knew about the inheritance, and she was now sleeping with my soon-to-be ex-husband. That wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Marcus, in his arrogance, had brought the weapon into the room. He had introduced the very person who could destroy his entire legal career and his freedom. I used the bedside phone again. Not to call him, but to call the real lawyer. The one I should have called from the start. A specialist in high-asset divorce and, more importantly, legal ethics. I spoke in a low, measured voice, my tone a flat, chilling statement of fact. I told him everything. The crash, the $11 million inheritance, the secret trust, the hospital abandonment, the divorce papers, and the appearance of Tamara Hayes, my inheritance attorney, as Marcus's new lover. My new lawyer, Mr. Stern, listened in stunned silence. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy. His first words were, "Mrs. Washington, we don't just have grounds for a contested divorce. We have grounds for disbarment and a criminal conspiracy investigation." The rage finally had a target. I instructed Mr. Enarand, Stern, to move with surgical precision. My immediate goals were twofold. First, legally establish Tamara Hayes' deep involvement in my financial affairs before the crash. And second, make Marcus believe he still had the upper hand, allowing him and Tamara to continue their arrogance until the trap was inescapable. We filed the countersuit, but we kept the central fact of the $11 million inheritance completely sealed from the public record. Marcus and Tamara couldn't know I was ready to use the money as leverage. They only saw the contested divorce papers, assuming I was fighting for scraps of community property. They were confident they could crush me. I pictured Tamara's face as she screamed, the blood draining from her high-priced composure. That fear, that pure, visceral panic, was the fuel I needed. She knew the consequences. She knew that her entire, meticulously built career was about to implode, all because of her own blinding greed and arrogance. She and Marcus were so focused on securing their future together that they risked everything, including their freedom, to ensure I was out of the way. My injuries were no longer just a source of pain. They were a shield. They were irrefutable proof of my vulnerability, making their calculated malice all the more heinous in the eyes of a judge and, eventually, a jury. They thought they were playing a simple divorce game. I was playing a game of total annihilation. They would lose the money, the career, and the reputation they had built on lies, all because they made one critical, unforgivable mistake. They didn't kill me. And now, I was coming for them, armed with the law and $11 million worth of vengeance. I spent the next few weeks recovering, but every physical therapy session, every agonizing step, was fueled by the cold fire of my vengeance. Marcus and Tamara, the architects of my near ruin, were so deeply entrenched in their confidence that they never suspected the depth of the hole they were digging. They thought my new lawyer, Mr. Stern, was just a competent mouthpiece fighting for a fair shake of a modest marital estate. They had no idea he was preparing a case for professional annihilation. The first hearing was not the divorce trial. It was a motion Mr. Stern filed to compel testimony regarding conflict of interest. The judge was a sharp, seasoned woman who clearly wasn't going to tolerate legal games. Marcus and Tamara strode into the courtroom. Tamara still projecting that sharp, brittle composure, Marcus still wearing the smug certainty of a man who believes he's above consequence. They looked at me now dressed in a simple, but expensive, suit, looking fragile but strong with pity and contempt. The moment came when Mr. Stern called Tamara to the stand. Her lawyer protested, trying to claim privilege, but the judge overruled him. Tamara sat down, her hands clasping the rail, her eyes avoiding mine. Mr. Stern didn't waste time. He pulled out the sealed documents from the inheritance trust. He held them up, pristine and utterly damning. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Stern's voice was steady, professional, and deadly. "You are representing Mr. Marcus Washington in this divorce proceeding, correct?" "Yes." Her voice was thin, a reedy lie trying to sound confident. "And you are aware that before this divorce was filed, you were retained by my client, Mrs. Amani, Washington, to handle the legal administration and management of a significant financial inheritance trust in her name? The color drained from her face again, just like it did in the hospital room. Marcus, sitting at the defense table, shot her a look of furious, panicked confusion. He had no idea what Mr. Stern was talking about. He still didn't know the secret. "Objection," her lawyer finally choked out. "This is irrelevant." "Objection overruled," the judge snapped. "Answer the question, Miss Hayes." Tamara tried to hedge, her composure finally fracturing. I handled some preliminary consultation." "Preliminary?" Mr. Stern countered, his voice rising in righteous anger. He pointed to the documents. "These are the completed, finalized trust documents, Miss Hayes. They confirm you were the sole outside administrator with full knowledge of the $11 million inheritance and the timing of its finalization. You were privy to privileged information. And days later, you appeared in the hospital room of your client, holding hands with her husband, serving her divorce papers while she was incapacitated. Isn't that correct?" Tamara couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a pathetic, desperate gesture. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, Marcus understood. The inheritance, the secret, the money, the reason for her scream, the sudden realization that he had partnered with a desperate, unethical fool who had jeopardized his entire escape plan. The judge didn't even wait. She didn't have to. The ethical breach was so blatant, so total, that it was a foregone conclusion. She held up a finger, addressing the lawyers. "Miss Hayes, you are immediately removed from this case. Furthermore, this court is compelled to refer this matter to the State Bar for an immediate and thorough investigation into professional misconduct and violation of client privilege. That is a court order." The destruction of her career was swift, public, and absolute. Tamara, the sleek, successful predator, was reduced to a shaking, weeping spectacle right there on the witness stand. My physical pain had been a silent agony. Her professional pain was a loud, catastrophic thunderclap. She had sought to steal my future. She had just lost her own. And Marcus, my treacherous husband, was sitting there, facing a disbarred lover and a soon-to-be very rich ex-wife who was now pointing a finger at him for conspiracy. The revenge was delicious, clean, and utterly justified. Tamara was gone, escorted out of the courtroom by her panicking lawyer and the heavy shadow of a professional misconduct investigation. But the judge's ruling, that cold, clinical statement about a conflict of interest, had done more than just disbar a greedy lawyer. It had shattered Marcus's confidence and confirmed my darkest suspicions. He sat there, staring at the empty witness stand, realizing his perfect, clean exit had just imploded. The $11 million secret was out, but only in the context of legal conspiracy, not as community property to be divided. The money wasn't a prize anymore. It was the bait and the evidence. I watched him. The smug certainty was replaced by a twitch in his jaw and a desperate, hunted look in his eyes. He finally whispered to his lawyer, "What trust? What $11 million?" He was a pathetic, ignorant fool, caught in a web woven by his own greed and his unethical lover. But the fear was the real gift, because he didn't just abandon me. I truly believe he set me up. The crash was too convenient, the timing too perfect. He knew I had been working on something financial with a lawyer, even if he didn't know the exact amount. He knew the inheritance was coming. The moment I became a liability, or worse, a distraction, he wanted me gone. My lawyer, Mr. Stern, wasn't done applying pressure. He pivoted immediately, using the conflict of interest finding as leverage to subpoena Marcus's phone records, emails, and financial logs dating back 3 months before the crash. "Your Honor," Mr. Stern stated calmly, "the extreme cruelty demonstrated by the defendant, coupled with the proven ethical breach of his co-conspirator, Tamara Hayes, suggests a financial motivation that extends beyond simple abandonment. We are requesting an investigation into the cause of the motor vehicle accident that left my client hospitalized." The judge nodded, her expression grim. That's when Marcus truly broke. He jumped out of his seat, screaming across the courtroom, "You can't prove anything. You're making this up. I had nothing to do with that crash. She's a terrible driver. She's always been irresponsible." Irresponsible. The word echoed his cruel dismissal from the hospital. He was panicked, sweating, realizing that the simple, clean divorce was spiraling into a criminal investigation. He was now fighting for his freedom, not his money. He was panicking because the truth of his calculated plot was about to be dragged into the light. My pain, the searing, agony of my broken body, was now being leveraged as evidence of his attempted murder. He wanted me out of the way. He wanted the life insurance, the clean divorce, the freedom to marry Tamara and maybe, just maybe, access a portion of the trust he assumed she could wrestle control of. I didn't utter a word. I just met his frantic gaze with a steady, cold stare. My presence, my survival, was his condemnation. He wanted me to sign the divorce papers and disappear quietly. Now, he was watching his entire life, his career, his reputation, his freedom sign away its own rights, all because he was too arrogant to believe the broken woman in the hospital bed could fight back. The revenge wasn't just sweet, it was a matter of survival. I had to prove the crash wasn't an accident. I had to prove he was trying to kill me, and I had $11 million dedicated to finding every shred of evidence to put that monster behind bars. Marcus was scrambling. He hired a new lawyer, a cheap, desperate man to defend him against the conspiracy charges. He was finally seeing the edge of the abyss, and the scent of fear was delicious. But my anger wasn't satiated. I had to know if the rot was isolated, or if it had infected the entire foundation of my life with him. I focused my attention on my mother-in-law, Patricia Washington. She was always the picture of matriarchal perfection, organized, judgmental, and utterly devoted to her golden boy, Marcus. She never liked me. She thought I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was a financial drag, that I was dragging down Marcus's shining potential. I decided to use the same technique that had worked on Marcus and Tamara, an unexpected confrontation with irrefutable evidence. Mr. Stern's investigation into Marcus's financials had yielded one crucial item: a series of unusually large, consistent wire transfers from Patricia to Marcus in the months leading up to the crash. Not just gifts. These were significant, regular payments. I confronted her outside her church after Sunday service. She was dressed impeccably, surrounded by her equally judgmental friends. She saw me, looking still a little fragile, and her face went rigid with distaste. "Amani, what on earth are you doing here?" she hissed, pulling her friends closer as a protective shield. "You know you are not welcome. Your drama is not going to taint my spiritual life." "My drama?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I stepped closer, forcing her to confront me, forcing her friends to hear. "I'm here because I'm trying to figure out if your financial support for Marcus was truly just helping him out, or if it was hush money," she gasped, her eyes flashing with pure fury. "How dare you? I support my son. You, on the other hand, are bankrupting him." "Am I?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that nevertheless carried. "Then why did you wire Marcus nearly $50,000 in the month before my crash? Was that the down payment for Tamara's new condo? Or was it the payment for the person who ran me off the road?" She slapped me, a sharp, stinging blow across my cheek. I didn't flinch. The pain was meaningless. The slap was the confirmation. It was the frantic, panicked lash of a cornered animal. "You are a liar, a venomous snake. You are trying to destroy my son," she screamed, drawing the full attention of the departing parishioners. "I am destroying the lie," I corrected her, my voice unwavering. "And I have the subpoenaed bank records right here, showing a coordinated effort to financially stabilize Marcus right as he was planning to abandon his wife, a wife who just happened to be in a mysterious, nearly fatal accident. Your money, Patricia, didn't just support his abandonment. It funded his freedom, his adultery, and potentially, his conspiracy." Her face crumbled. The perfect matriarch dissolved into a terrified, gasping woman. She didn't offer comfort for my injuries. She offered money to cover her son's tracks. Her loyalty wasn't to morality or decency. It was to the poisonous image of her golden boy. She had been a silent accomplice. Her refusal to love me was actively translated into financial support for his betrayal. She was complicit in the emotional, and possibly physical, destruction of her daughter-in-law. Her entire, carefully constructed world of pious perfection was a lie built on the ruins of my happiness. I left her there, weeping on the church steps, surrounded by the horrified whispers of her friends. My mother-in-law's toxic loyalty had bought her son a one-way ticket to prison, and it had bought her the eternal shame of public scrutiny. She didn't just lose a daughter-in-law, she lost her reputation, and soon she would lose her son, and she deserved every shred of that devastating, humiliating loss. The case didn't drag on. Mr. Stern was relentless, and the confluence of my survival, Tamara's ethical breach, and Marcus's frantic, transparent, financial maneuvers created an undeniable narrative of conspiracy. The court didn't need to definitively prove Marcus orchestrated the crash. The burden of proof in a civil court for financial ruin is lower than a criminal one for murder, but the mere suspicion was enough to annihilate him. Marcus, the golden boy, the successful lawyer, was now just a terrified defendant. He saw his prestigious firm quietly distance itself from him. He saw his clients evaporate. He saw his perfect future crumble into dust. He had risked everything for a quick divorce and a share of a fortune he didn't know the size of. And now he was going to lose everything he actually had. The final day in court was short and brutal. Mr. Stern presented a picture of calculated, financial cruelty. He used my broken body as the symbol of Marcus's utter lack of humanity. He used Tamara's scream as the sound of their guilt. He used Patricia's $50,000 as the proof of a coordinated financial plot. I sat there, looking at Marcus one last time. He looked like a pauper, his cheap suit ill-fitting, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He tried to catch my eye, to plead, to beg, to try to weave one last, desperate lie. I refused to look away. I forced him to stare into the face of the woman he tried to destroy. The judge's ruling was delivered with a cold, judicial fury. She not only granted the divorce, but she deemed the entire marital estate my sole property, citing extreme spousal cruelty. Marcus walked away with nothing but the debts he had accrued. But the real strike was the financial judgment. The judge, fueled by righteous anger at the ethical depravity of the case, hit him with the highest possible damages. She ordered Marcus to pay me millions in punitive and compensatory damages, an amount so astronomical it guaranteed his permanent financial ruin. He would be paying me for the rest of his miserable life, a perpetual debtor to the woman he abandoned, the money he tried to. Escape the $11 million inheritance was mine, untouched and secure in its trust. But the money he owed me? That was the payment for his betrayal. His lawyer tried to argue that the judgment was excessive, that it would bankrupt him, that it was unfair. Fairness? The judge asked, her voice ringing with finality. Fairness is a woman walking out of a marriage with half of the assets. Justice is a woman surviving a conspiracy and taking everything from the man who left her broken in a hospital bed. Marcus collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. He was ruined, financially, legally, and professionally. The man who cared only about his bank account was now a bankrupt pariah. I had won. The physical pain of my injuries was still a reality, but the deep, soul-crushing wound of his betrayal was finally healing. The $11 million was not just my money, it was my vindication. It was the weapon that ensured his betrayal cost him more than he could ever imagine. And for Tamara and Patricia, the destruction was only just beginning to take root. They had backed the wrong horse, and their loyalties had cost them everything. I walked out of that courtroom, not just a survivor, but a victor, armed with my fortune and the cold satisfaction of absolute justice. The judge's gavel hit the bench like a final, terminal blow. Marcus was ruined, but my vengeance was comprehensive. It had to be. It extended to every person who had participated, either actively or passively, in the conspiracy to destroy me. Tamara Hayes was my next target. She had committed the ultimate professional betrayal, leveraging confidential client knowledge for personal and financial gain. The state bar investigation, mandated by the judge, moved with terrifying speed. They didn't have to prove she caused the crash. They only had to prove she compromised her ethics for the money. And she had screamed the evidence out loud right in front of me. The disbarment was immediate and humiliating. It was published in the Legal Chronicle, a cold, factual recounting of her ethical felonies. The woman who defined herself by her impeccable credentials, her high-powered firm, and her flawless reputation was now a legal non-entity, stripped of her right to practice law, stripped of her status, stripped of the very identity she had used to betray me. But the worst was the financial annihilation. Her firm, horrified by the scandal and the association with a failed conspiracy, immediately fired her. They didn't just fire her, they sued her for breach of contract, professional malpractice, and reputational damage. She lost her equity partnership, the hundreds of thousands of dollars she thought she had safely invested in her future. The new wife, the woman Marcus had flaunted in my hospital room, was suddenly jobless, professionally disgraced, and facing an avalanche of lawsuits. The expensive condo she shared with Marcus, that was put up for a quick sale to cover her mounting legal fees. Her flashy cars were repossessed. The expensive clothes and jewelry? Suddenly liabilities, not assets. The rage I felt when she screamed was replaced by a grim, cold satisfaction. She thought she was marrying a high-value asset. She married a high-risk liability. Her betrayal of client trust had cost her more than the $11 million she hoped to steal. It cost her everything she valued in her shallow life. She traded her entire successful career for a chance at a quick, illicit fortune, and she was left with nothing but shame and debt. I could have stopped the state bar investigation. I could have offered a quiet settlement. But why would I? She was a predator who violated the sanctity of the attorney-client relationship, a violation that could have literally cost me my life and my fortune. She deserved the full, crushing weight of the system she had abused. And Marcus? He was left with a disbarred, bankrupt mistress who could no longer offer him legal protection or financial gain. Their entire relationship was built on greed, and when the money vanished, the relationship disintegrated into mutual bitterness and blame. She blamed him for the amateur execution of the plot. He blamed her for the ethical stupidity of getting caught. They were left to destroy each other, a fitting, perfectly deserved punishment for the architects of my suffering. My pain was finally becoming theirs, exponentially and relentlessly. Marcus was a financial ruin. Tamara was a professional ghost, buried under a mountain of debt and legal shame. But my vengeance was not complete until I dealt with the toxic root of the problem. My mother-in-law, Patricia Washington. She was the matriarch, the enabler, the one whose toxic loyalty had funded and encouraged her son's depravity. Her public humiliation at the church steps was just a preview. Her true punishment had to be the loss of the only thing she valued more than Marcus: her social standing and her perfect, successful image. I instructed Mr. Stern to leak the full details of the civil suit, the conspiracy charges, the punitive damages, the disbarment of Tamara, and the judge's scathing comments to a highly respected, but gossipy, legal columnist. The leak was timed perfectly, right before the annual Bar Association Gala, the one event where Patricia always shone as the proud, pious mother of a successful lawyer. The articles hit the wire, detailing the unethical conspiracy to defraud and abandon incapacitated wife, with Marcus and Tamara as the starring villains, and Patricia's generous financial support being cited as a potential resource for the punitive damages. Her carefully curated life of piety and perfection was instantly exposed as a sham, built on a foundation of moral corruption and blind, destructive favoritism. I didn't have to call her. The world did it for me. Her bridge club dissolved. Her charity board asked for her immediate resignation. Her church asked her to step down from the council. The woman who lived for reputation was now a pariah, whispered about in every corner of her exclusive, judgmental community. Her golden boy was a bankrupt felon, and she was the woman who had helped pay for the attempt to murder his wife. I went to her home one last time, not to gloat, but to watch her face as the last shard of her pride crumbled. She opened the door, looking haggard, her elegant clothes now looking like a cheap costume. "They're calling me a criminal, Amani," she whispered, her voice hollow. "They are saying I helped him run you off the road. It's not true. I just gave him the money because he asked." "You gave him the money to get rid of me, Patricia," I corrected her, my voice cold. "You didn't ask why he needed a sudden $50,000 while his wife was recovering from a crash. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just gave him the funds to execute his plot. Your loyalty wasn't love. It was a transaction. You paid for my silence, and you paid for his freedom." I looked around the luxurious house, the one she took such pride in maintaining. "I have $11 million, Patricia. I could have bought you 3 of these houses. But I won't. I'm going to take the judgment against Marcus, which is millions, and I'm going to wait until it forces you to sell this house to cover his debts. Because you funded his betrayal, you will fund his ruin." She collapsed against the wall, weeping hysterically. Not for her son, not for me, but for the loss of her perfect, superficial life. She was left alone with her shame, abandoned by the very people whose approval she craved. She had traded her integrity for the illusion of success, and now she had nothing. Her punishment was the most satisfying of all. It was total social death, orchestrated by the broken, abandoned woman she considered a failure. She lost the son she idolized, the status she craved, and the financial stability she prioritized. Her tears were the final, bitter payment for her toxic, blinding loyalty. The shame was absolute. Marcus, Tamara, and Patricia, they were all casualties of their own greed. I had achieved total victory. The $11 million was mine, secured and untouchable, a monument to my resilience. Marcus was paying millions in punitive damages, which would follow him for the rest of his miserable, debt-ridden life. Tamara was professionally and financially ruined. Patricia was a social pariah, living in fear of the day she had to sell her home to satisfy her son's catastrophic debts. The pain, however, lingered. Victory does not erase the wound of betrayal. It only gives you the strength to stand on the scar. I was no longer a victim, but I was irrevocably changed. I carried the knowledge that the man who shared my bed, the woman I trusted with my fortune, and the woman who should have been my second mother, were all willing to see me dead for money. That is a wound that never truly heals. I used the $11 million with cold, calculated precision. I didn't spend it on yachts or mansions. I spent it on fortifying my defenses and ensuring their destruction was permanent. I set up a foundation, the Imani Washington Survivors Trust, dedicated to funding legal aid for victims of spousal financial abuse and complex fraud. It was a clear, perpetual slap in the face to Marcus and Tamara, a constant, institutional reminder of their ethical failures. I continued my physical therapy, focusing not on healing the past, but on building a future. Every time the physical pain flared, I thought of Marcus's annoyance, Tamara's scream, and Patricia's pathetic begging. That pain became fuel, driving me further away from the weakness they tried to exploit. The most profound realization was the one I shared with no one. I realized that the crash, that catastrophic, near-fatal event, was the ultimate gift. It saved me. If I had walked through the door that day with the news of the $11 million, I would have been celebrating with a viper. I would have lived a lie, slowly poisoned by Marcus's greed, trapped in a conspiracy I never suspected. The crash forced the truth into the open. It made the betrayal so blatant, so publicly monstrous, that I had no choice but to fight with the fury of a survivor. The scream was the key that unlocked the conspiracy. It was the sound of my life being saved. I was free. Free from the sham marriage, free from the toxic expectations of my mother-in-law, and free from the terrifying idea that I had to share my life with a person who valued my death over my existence. The price of that freedom was agonizing physical pain, immense emotional devastation, and a relentless, draining legal battle. But I paid it. And the reward, the $11 million, the justice, and the truth was worth every single, searing moment of agony. I was a broken woman who survived a crash and a conspiracy, and now, I was ready to build a life that was not just successful, but genuinely, fiercely mine. The story wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back my identity from the thieves who tried to bury it. The silence that followed the final judgment was the true measure of my victory. It was the silence of utter finality. Marcus was stripped bare, legally and financially. The golden boy was reduced to a bitter, bankrupt debtor, his entire future mortgaged to the punitive damages he owed me. He tried to appeal. He lost. He tried to claim insolvency. The courts laughed, pointing to the deliberate and malicious intent of his actions. His legal career was over, replaced by a life of perpetual, crushing debt. And Tamara, the high-powered lawyer who screamed when she saw me alive, she faced a swift, brutal reckoning. Her ethical crimes were too egregious, too public. She was convicted as an accomplice to a financial conspiracy and served time. She lost her freedom, her profession, and her status. The woman who sought to steal my $11 million fortune ended up with a felony record and debt that was insurmountable. She had traded her integrity for greed, and the price she paid was absolute annihilation. She deserved every single, lonely minute of her fate. Patricia, the matriarch, suffered a slower, more agonizing death of the spirit. She lost the house. The judgment against Marcus, combined with her own financial assistance to him, eventually forced the sale of her precious, perfect home to satisfy the creditors. She lost her social shield. She lost her dignity. She was left alone, watching her perfect world crumble into the dust of her son's betrayal. She calls me. Oh God, she calls me constantly. Long, rambling, weeping messages full of blame, anger, and pathetic attempts at reconciliation. I never answer. Her stress is permanent. Her peace is forever shattered. I don't call this happiness. Happiness is too simple a word for the complex, scarred satisfaction I feel. This is justice. This is vengeance. This is the complete, uncompromising validation that my life was worth, more than his convenience and her greed. The $11 million is no longer just money. It is my fortress. It is the solid, unshakable foundation built on the wreckage of their lives. It is the perpetual funding for the Imani Washington Survivors Trust, ensuring that their names, Marcus Washington, Tamara Hayes, are forever associated with the despicable, unforgivable crime of spousal abandonment and financial conspiracy. Every dollar spent on aiding a victim of fraud is a direct slap in the face to their ruined legacy. The final, bitter lesson is this: I had to die to live. I had to endure the crash, the broken bones, and the total betrayal to see the truth. The physical pain of the injuries eventually faded, but the soul-deep agony of knowing I slept next to a killer never will. That scar is permanent, but it is my greatest strength. It is a constant reminder that I am a survivor, forged in fire and armed with a fortune they never deserved. I look at the world differently now. I see the deception, the subtle avarice, the conditional nature of almost every relationship. But I also see the power of self-reliance. I walked away from the grave and took everything from the man who put me there. I am free. I am rich, and I am utterly, definitively alone. But I am no longer terrified. I am the winner of a game I never asked to play, and my victory is the eternal payment for the cruelest lie of my life. I finally have peace, a peace bought with their ruin, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.